All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, and author of Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Sign up for the podcast feed at scotthorton.org or scotthortonshow.com. I've got more than 6,000 interviews in the archive for you there going back to 2003. And follow me on all the video sites and X at Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, on the line, I got Kyle Anzalone. He's news editor at the Institute, and he's the opinion editor at antiwar.com, and he's the host of the Kyle Anzalone Show and also Conflicts of Interest, which are both on your YouTubes and on your Twitters and on all your podcatchers and stuff. Hey, man, how are you?
Doing well, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. Good to see you and talk to you. God dang, well, let's just talk about the Gaza news. The top headline on antiwar.com today is U.S.-Israel quit truce talks as Gaza starves. So was there anything to these talks in the first place or what?
Yeah, so Jeremy Scahill, who I guess is in contact with some Hamas officials, has been kind of relaying the Hamas position on this, and they did seem to take it seriously, and they did, I think, try to offer a proposal that they saw themselves giving concessions in some areas, including swapping the rest of their hostages for the Israeli the rest of the Israeli captives for some Palestinians who are held by Israel. I guess there are two main demands that it seems that Israel was unwilling to budge on. They wanted a commitment from the United States that, you know, there was no reason to go back to the fighting once the 60-day ceasefire was over. And they wanted the UN to distribute food in Gaza and not the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which everybody is admitting, including contractors, American contractors who have worked for the GHF, that those things are just death trap nightmares.
Well, I'll have you talk about that more in just one sec, but I wanted to get clarification there. Were you saying that Hamas had backed down enough that they were saying they would give up the last of their Israeli hostages in favor,
right,
just for a temporary ceasefire, which is a huge climb down from a permanent end to the fighting? Is that right?
Correct. And then they were going to, I think they were trying to walk a line on demanding a full withdrawal from Israeli troops in Gaza, saying that Israeli troops would be allowed to stay in buffer zones in certain security areas in Gaza. And so they weren't even demanding a full withdrawal anymore. And in response to this, both the Americans and the Israelis said, well, they're being completely unreasonable. We can't deal with these people. We're going home, which I guess probably gives some credence to the fact that Hamas came back with a reasonable proposal. The fact that they, gave up on negotiations so quickly, because I think it's pretty clear that Israel doesn't want to deal at this point.
Yeah. What has Hamas said about the various proposals from Egypt and Saudi and I guess Qatar about them forming some kind of international consortium to take over and rebuild the place and all that?
Yeah, I mean, so this is another interesting dynamic I've seen Jeremy Scahill report on quite a bit, that Hamas is trying to give up governance of the Gaza Strip. And they've put in several of their proposals to Israel that they would give up all their, I guess, political role as far as, administering food and running like the Gaza Health Ministry and things like this. They no longer want that responsibility in Gaza. And the Israelis and the Americans keep taking that language out of any ceasefire deal. And so they seem receptive to these proposals of some other organization, coalition. I'm not sure about, exactly the Palestinian Authority, but some other Palestinian or other organization coming in and running the governance of Gaza.
Mm-hmm. All right, now, so there's another major headline. Well, yeah, let's stick with the politics for a second. We'll talk about the humanitarian thing more in a second, although obviously that's part of it, part and parcel. But so Israeli minister, Gaza will be wiped out. And I know that, the Hasbara side of the story will be, yeah, but this guy is not in charge of that or anything, and so who cares what he says. But this is a chorus of voices there among the Israeli leadership saying as plainly as they possibly could for almost 2 years now, year and 3/4 or so, that their goal is to kick every last Palestinian out of the Gaza Strip. And this is just another, but can you tell us a little bit more about who this guy was and what it was exactly he said?
Oh, I actually don't have his name in front of me, Scott.
Oh, that's all right.
Apologies for that. But yeah, as you say, this is an absolute chorus of all members of, I guess maybe not the Israeli political spectrum. I think there are still like some far left parties and the members of the Knesset who represent the Arabs, but effectively everybody else is saying throw all the Palestinians out of Gaza. Most vocal has been those like Bezalel Smotrich and Itmar Ben-Gvir, who are the finance minister, national security minister. They're always called the fringe viewpoints in Israel, and these are the far right extremists, Scott, but they have an awful lot of power, and so they are not fringe elements. They represent and they control a lot of what the Israeli government does. But it's also clear, I think, that this is a part of the policy of the coalition led by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I think at this point it's very clear they're following the plan that was put together by Ron Dermer, who is one of Netanyahu's closest allies. He was born in Miami. On my show, James Carden called him a traitor to the United States because he's now a member of the Israeli Knesset, but he's constantly lurking around the White House. And his plan is to make conditions in Gaza so horrific that the Arab states will no longer see it as aiding a genocide to take in the Palestinians, but rather an act of charity. And so that's, very clear what the Israelis are doing. And it's not, again, any kind of fringe elements. As many members of them saying it publicly, but it's also in their policy papers and positions that they have drawn up to actually deal with this situation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Netanyahu is calling for the formation of a concentration camp. The defense minister has even said that they want to concentrate the population there. So, they obviously understand the language that they're using and what that signifies. And Netanyahu's plan calls for first putting 600,000 Palestinians in Rafah and then the rest of the population. And from there, they will only be allowed to exit Gaza. They will never be allowed to return to their homes. And one of the amazing parts about this, Scott, is that the IDF actually doesn't want to do this. The IDF chief of staff came up with a proposal that he wanted to bring to the Israeli security cabinet that would limit the IDF operations to just going against Hamas. He says the IDF doesn't want to take care of the civilian population. I guess he understands that he doesn't want to turn all of his soldiers into, Nazi concentration camp guards, which is effectively what all these members of the IDF, all these young Israelis are going to be, are guards at a concentration camp. But the Netanyahu proposal goes through, and Netanyahu wouldn't even let him bring the proposal to the security cabinet. He's shutting down all debate on this. And so it's very clear that this is the Israeli policy.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, so first of all, I brought it up. So it's the heritage minister, Amichai Eliyahu, from the Jewish Power Party, who was the one who was saying they must be wiped out. The government is racing ahead for Gaza to be wiped out, he said approvingly. Thank God we are wiping out this evil. And you got to love this. We are pushing out this population that has been educated on Mein Kampf. What's he doing? He's talking about what we're going to do is we're going to take all the undesirables and we're going to transfer them somewhere far to the east, like Indonesia. Yeah. Anyway, somebody here is emulating the Nazis. Mitchell Plitnick, who's an American liberal Jewish critic and writer for the Mondo Weiss. I'm sure you were the one who picked this article to run on antiwar.com the other day. He ran a thing, and it was about the head of Mossad came to the United States to meet, at least with Witkoff, I don't know if with Rubio or whoever else, to work on the plan for getting rid of the final transfer of the Palestinians out of there. The Israelis, I guess, figure, like taking out Fordo, they need America to do it for them. And so that was why they were here, to get Trump's guys to start agreeing to a real plan, right? To come up with a real plan. Or we're going to make these people go either to Libya, Ethiopia or Indonesia. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so there have been talks between Washington and Tel Aviv about this, even in the early days of the conflict. I think by maybe November or December of 2023, the Biden administration was talking with Netanyahu about possibly sending the Palestinians to Chad or Rwanda or a country like that. And so but they seem to be getting far more serious now. And yeah, what Tel Aviv needs Washington to do is use the leverage that our empire has to get countries to take in the Palestinians. And my guess, Scott, is that they're trying to divide them up over a very large number of countries, right? It may be more problematic if Egypt has to take in 1 million Palestinians from Gaza, but they've approached a long list of countries. You mentioned there Indonesia. They've approached both governments of Libya, both Haftar, who rules in Benghazi, and the Tripoli government. They've gone to the Sudanese government, all three governments of Somalia, the Mogadishu government, Puntland, Somaliland. They talked to Jolani in Syria. And so what is one of the common threads about all these governments, Scott? They all could desperately use something from the United States of America. Dave DeCamp has a story this week at antiwar.com that the Somali army that defends the Mogadishu government is melting away in front of an al-Shabaab offensive. Yep. Of course, Puntland and Somaliland would love international recognition from the United States. Either government of Libya, of course, could probably finish off the other with just a little bit of U.S. military assistance. Sudan is in the middle of a civil war, and I'm sure would take any assistance that they can. And I think this is even more nefarious than sending all the Palestinians to, say, one individual country where they would probably live in a concentrated area and hold on to a large part of their culture. But if they spread them out, and there's only 100,000 here or there, and they're in war-torn states with poor economies, it's probably going to force pretty rapid assimilation. And I mean, what Israel is talking about doing is the just outright destruction of a people in this policy. And the United States is not only going to bribe countries into it, but we're probably going to pick up a large portion of the tab for building the refugee cities in Somalia and Libya, wherever the Palestinians are going to end up being sent to. I mean, this is just the worst thing that you could absolutely imagine. And it's largely going to be paid for and bought with American influence.
I wonder if they can really do it. I guess, it would take U.S. Navy ships, U.S. troops to force these people onto ships and move them to Indonesia, move them to Libya. Put them on trains through Egypt down to Ethiopia? How do you get them to Ethiopia? Just landlocked away from the ocean. All this is just insane. And this leads to another question, which I don't have a good handle on, man. I'm too far out of following the current events on this. What is the pace of fighting on the ground as far as airstrikes versus IDF troops on the ground taking territory, the strength of the continued resistance? I know there's not rockets being fired into Israel, I've heard Ehud Olmert and also the generals have said that Hamas is still there. They still got tens of thousands of guys, 20,000, as many as they started with. The war has accomplished nothing as far as that goes. They've taken out their more powerful leadership from the old days, but that the fighters essentially remain. Then again, the Israelis have killed a hell of a lot of people, and presumably at least sometimes they're targeting Hamas fighters. And so when it comes down to it, is Hamas beaten enough that they'll be able to just transfer out everyone else? There's no one left there to take pot shots at them as they try to corral everybody and push them into the sea here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, Scott. I think the estimates I've seen from the U.S. intelligence community. Blinken said this before the Biden administration ended. I've heard it from the Trump administration too, and from Israeli opposition officials in the Knesset, that Hamas's strength is actually 40,000 fighters that they've been able to recruit and replace everybody that they've lost. Now, I've also read that Hamas can't necessarily sustain a 40,000 man army at this point. They don't have the weaponry, and they certainly don't have the food to do that. And so most members of Hamas are just living at the, they're like reservists. They could be called up in the future maybe, but they're not actively fighting as members of Hamas. Now, Hamas does have some isolated cells, and they are carrying out some attacks. Every few days, maybe every week, you'll read a story of some number of Israeli soldiers killed in some sort of ambush attack, or Hamas plants. They use a dud Israeli bomb to mine a house, so when an Israeli bulldozer runs over it, the operator gets killed or something like that. So Israel is certainly still taking casualties in this fight, but it doesn't seem that Hamas is in any coordinated way putting up a defensive. Now, that may change in the coming weeks. Israel is moving into Deir al-Balah, a city that they haven't attacked, and there's some speculation that that's because they believe the hostages are there, and so there certainly would be some Hamas fighters around those hostages. And I guess it's possible that there's more fighting than we've seen in some time in the coming weeks because of that. But it doesn't seem like there's ground battles going on across Gaza, and the IDF is able to operate in a lot of areas. I mean, they're just carrying out rampant destruction. Haaretz had a report saying that they're paying contractors $15,000 for every house they bulldoze. So they're just destroying everything because it's all money, every single house that you run over. Of course, the IDF is all over Gaza with checkpoints, and that's where they're mowing down the civilians, trying to get to there's only 4 GHF aid distribution points in Gaza right now. So people have to travel long distances to get to where their food is, and the IDF is operating in those areas. And there's a lot of Palestinians around. The Israelis are just gunning them down, so obviously Hamas isn't active there. Now, one of the things and the problems I'm sure Israel recognizes, Scott, is that if they were to withdraw from Gaza, then whatever militant group, whether it's Hamas or something else, Gaza is absolutely littered with unexploded bombs that Israel has dropped. I mean, thousands and thousands of them by the IDF's own estimate. I think maybe 6 months ago or so for the Institute, I wrote an article about they estimate there was between 6 and 8 1,000 unexploded
and
Israeli
this is
bombs.
Where Hamas is getting their arms from, right? Is what the Israelis are leaving behind.
Right. And so I would guess that if there was a meaningful ceasefire where Israel withdrew and Hamas was able to start to carry out activities again, that they would be able to rearm relatively quickly. But at this point, they do seem somewhat beaten, at least are unable to field much of a fighting force against the IDF.
Yeah. Hey, y'all, if you run a business or a side hustle and want to keep more of your money out of the IRS's hands, Matthew Cersoli, the Agorist tax advisor, is your guy. He'll help you set up your business the right way, find every legal deduction, and keep the feds off your back without you ever needing to talk to the IRS yourself. Unlike most tax pros, Matthew actually hates the IRS and calls it a win-win when you get to keep your money and the government gets less. That's my kind of tax guy. Check him out at agoristtaxadvice.com/Scott to get your free Agorist tax toolkit. That's agoristtaxadvice.com/Scott.
Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education.
Hey, y'all, here's how you can support those who support this show and stay awake while you're doing things. Moondo's Artisan Coffees. MoondosArtisanCoffees.com. Get it? Starbucks supports the war party. Moondo's is with us. And it's really good. Get the Scott Horton Show blend. Just click the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org. All right, so tell me everything about the hunger and the famine and who's causing it. I saw an Israeli on the news say, but it's Hamas is just stealing all the food. That's why everybody else is going hungry. So tell me what you know.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the most horrific thing, Scott. As I said before, there's only 4 GHF aid distribution sites in Gaza. I've, read story after story from Palestinians in Gaza who are explaining what the situation's like. They don't advertise when the sites are going to open, so people just leave at like 8 p.m. the night before and start walking in the direction in the dark that they think it is, because I guess they feel safer from the general Israeli forces under the cover of darkness. Those going to the aid distribution sites, and this has been reported by Palestinians and Western doctors in Gaza, are being killed not only by Israeli soldiers who say they feel their lives are threatened by the Palestinians, but also being killed by Israeli tanks, artillery, and drones. And so this is, one the I want to paint the image that every day tens of thousands of Palestinians wake up starving and they go hungry and hot and they try to get food, and along the way they're being shelled, they're being fired on by tanks, they're being gas is fired at them, and they're being hit with snipers and quadcopter drones, so guns with or drones with guns mounted on them, right? Like, this is an unbelievable horror show. Numerous aid agencies have referred to it as like killing fields. Others have described the situation as the GHF is a part of the genocide, that they are meant to be death traps, was the phrase that Amnesty International used to describe them. And so once the Palestinians get there, there's no organization. They lay the food out in the sand. They open the gates, and hungry Palestinians rush in to get food. The Palestinians are describing it like the Hunger Games, where the Palestinians turn on each other in a sense. They say knives come out, fist fights break out. The food, of course, gets torn apart and dropped in the sand, and so people are picking up pots that has like sand and lentils and rice and flour mixed in with the food. It's just the absolute sickest thing. And then this is from a security contractor who worked with the IDF, a 25-year veteran of the U.S. Army. So this isn't somebody who could be dismissed as like weak or just not understanding what it takes to get the job done. But once the period that they're allowed to get the food is over, they start firing warning shots, or they start just directly firing on the Palestinians. He described it as shooting at their legs. They go in with gas and they start spraying gas in people's face and force them to leave the aid distribution site, like fleeing for their lives with the little food that they have, where they're funneled back into where the IDF positions are, and they get killed on their way back to where the rest of their families are, again, to bring a meager amount of food. I mean, this is like the situation every day for the Palestinians. And again, this is backed up not only by the Palestinian testimony, but also Western doctors and the GHF security contractors. One more thing I want to mention here is the Dr. Nick Menard. He's a British surgeon who's right now in Gaza. I believe he's in the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. And he says that babies are starving to death, that people with treatable injuries are starving to death in their hospital beds because there's simply no food, that the Palestinian doctors and nurses are all malnourished as well. And in a particular act of sadism, he said that in the past, American doctors who are volunteering in Gaza, you're allowed to bring in a little bit of luggage, and rather than bringing in food or any comfort items, the doctors just bring in like protein bars and then formula for babies. And this time the IDF actually confiscated the baby formula from the American doctors as they were bringing it in.
Yeah, so Now, I wanted to emphasize what you're saying there about the reports. I mean, you're naming names here. These reports from the Israeli media, where you have, these big specials, these in-depth reports based on direct testimony by Israeli enlisted men and officers talking about them doing this, essentially luring people in with aid and then massacring them, not just machine gunning them, but hitting them with artillery, as you said, with artillery and tanks and the rest. It sounds like the kind of thing where, okay, so like that movie Red Dawn, the original, not the remake, in the 1980s, they line up all the patriots and machine gun them to death and everything. But like if you had a scene in that movie where the Russians occupying America are so evil that they're starving everyone and then they lure everyone to get food and then they machine gun them like that, I just think how badly the Democrats would have denounced that as just such over-the-top, cartoonish propaganda, right? Like Waylon Smithers says, cartoonish supervillainy beyond just regular villainy. Like it sounds absurd, and then maybe like it couldn't be true then, because just how absurd could that be? If it's really like that, then how come we're supporting them then?
Right.
But then this is the top headline at Haaretz, and they have it in the officers' own words that, yeah, we hit them at the food sites, all right. And they know that these people are unarmed, that, as you described, they're just killing men, women, and children, shooting fish in a barrel.
Right. I mean, it is the level of evil that Israel's engaged in here. One of the things that Dr. Menard said was that it appears that the Israeli snipers are playing some sort of game, and on different days they're shooting young Palestinians as young as 11, 12, 13, 14 years old in different body parts. And so one day you'll have injuries of people shot in the heart, the next day the leg, the next day the neck, even the genitals. I mean, it's hard to even describe how sadistic and how twisted the morality of the individual IDF soldiers, which is apparently a lot of them. This is one of the things I had interviewed Dr. Farod Sidwa. He's a big advocate of antiwar.com and a doctor who has been in Gaza several times. Talked about that. Initially, he thought it was maybe one sadistic Israeli sniper that was just killing Israeli children in a localized area of Gaza. But as he talked to his colleagues who had also spent time in Gaza, they realized that no, Israeli snipers are just picking off children day after day after day. And it's obviously not incidental. They're being shot right through the heart every single time. This is evidence he actually brought to the New York Times, and the New York Times ran a story on this. And yeah, you're right. Like the level of evil that Israel is engaged in here, when you talk about it, I think that's why maybe like the AIPAC argument that, oh, this is anti-Semitic rings true with people, because they think no group of people could be this evil. And yet it just continues to go on and on and on. Although I will say, I keep seeing people like Miss Rachel posting about this and just, showing the poor, malnourished, emaciated Palestinian children. And nobody buys that woman is anti-Semitic or that she's lying to you. And so I do think that the whole anti-Semitism argument is really losing its weight as this genocide goes on. And as that happens, I guess more people will hopefully believe all the stories that the Palestinians are telling about the cruelty that the Israelis are subjecting upon them.
Yeah. And look, for anyone listening to this who you have felt intimidated in the past, that you don't want to talk about this because you're afraid what might happen, somebody's going to call you a bad name or whatever, don't be afraid. That's silly. And especially at this point, it just ain't going to stick. Somebody calls you anti-Semitic, just tell your boss, nah, I just said something about Israel. And he probably agrees with you at this point anyway. It's time to go ahead and be courageous. Enough of this. Well, tell me this, though, Kyle. I mean, in the other side of the story, that like the Israelis and the Christians there, the Israeli Jews and the Christians, they're facing a war by these jihadists. Like, didn't some Hamas suicide bombers attack a Catholic church there the other day and kill 3 people?
Yeah, in IDF uniforms, and after they hijacked an IDF tank, apparently. No, of course, it was the Israeli forces that shelled the only Catholic hospital in Gaza, leaving 3 people dead. Just an absolutely horrific crime.
Oh, it wasn't just a church; it was a hospital too.
Oh no, I'm sorry. It was a church. It was like only Catholic church. Excuse me, only Catholic church in Gaza. Thanks for catching me there, Scott. And yeah, I mean, again, it's so awful that even something like that invokes a little bit of statements from like Mike Huckabee. There was a article in Axios where one White House official said, "What the F does Netanyahu thinks he's doing?" Another White House official called Netanyahu a madman, saying that he just bombs everything all the time. That's all he does. Not that it's had any impact on U.S. policy towards Israel, but you have this weird thing where there are apparently some people within the administration even that are just wondering about the how absurd and how far Israel has gone at this point.
Yeah. If he's a madman, then how come we're backing him then? If that's the consensus from everywhere between antiwar.com and the Republican White House that actually supports them, then I think we've achieved consensus here. Thank you for coming on the show. Great to talk to you again.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to The Scott Horton Show, which can be heard on APS Radio News at scotthorton.org, scotthortonshow.com, and the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org.